Do you remember how Doga said Doga is not unkillable because he has armor, Doga is unkillable because he is Doga? Oswin is also unkillable. I am convinced that Oswin is the reason why a lot of players love Armor Knights in Fire Emblem. He is by far the best one in the series, to the point where none of the others live up to his reputation. He sets the expectations so high that players will convince themselves that the other Armor Knights are good, even when they're clearly so much worse. In other words, he is a great example of false advertising in Fire Emblem. Oswin is tanky. He is so tanky. He has a base HP of 28 and a base defense of 13. If you put him in range of all the generic enemies in his joining chapter, in Hector hard mode, he comfortably survives. I edited the game to rig the situation so that they could all attack him, and he just shrugged it off. He does die if the boss gets involved because the boss is so strong, but still it's only by a really small margin.
Actually, in this footage he lives because he gained defense, but you can see in my spreadsheet here that he is supposed to die at base level.
Oswin is actually bulkier than Marcus, which says a lot considering Oswin is a level 9 unpromoted unit, while Marcus is a pre-promote. Your next most durable unit at this point is most likely Hector, who at this point in the game likely only barely has 20 HP, and if he's lucky, maybe he's got double-digit defense. Not only is Oswin able to protect, he can also attack. His base strength is 13, just as high as his defense. Combined with the solid might of lances, Oswin can comfortably two-shot almost every enemy type. That means Oswin isn't just sitting there taking hits, he's always making solid progress when he fights, and because of his massive bulk, that can be a lot of enemies at the same time. You can just stick Oswin into a section of the map with high enemy density, pull enemies towards him like a magnet, and as long as you don't have other units get in range, the problem will take care of itself. Alternatively, Oswin does enough damage in one hit that other units can often pick off the enemies that he's weakened. This is a massive boon that makes it so much easier to train your other units while Oswin is around. Marcus can do this too if you make sure he doesn't double, like by rescuing someone with him, but Oswin doesn't have to do that, which means you can reserve Marcus for the more troublesome enemies that you really want to get rid of right away. Now so far, these are just advantages that we expect from Armor Knights: high durability and high attack power. Supposedly, they are balanced out by their 4 main weak points: vulnerability to armor slaying weapons, low speed, poor resistance to magic, and a lack of mobility. These are the things that hold Armor Knights back from being overpowered, usually. But with Oswin it's a bit different because he's less impacted by these drawbacks than most other Armor Knights, and in this video we're going to explore why that is, and more interestingly, how despite this apparent lack of weaknesses, Oswin is a really balanced and well-designed unit in the context of Fire Emblem 7 as a whole. So first, the weakness to armor slayers, heavy spears, and hammers. This straight up just doesn't matter for Oswin. Those weapons are rarely in enemy hands in the first place. I can think of like 1 or 2 off the top of my head, and I probably wouldn't even be able to find footage of them. They're also weak. The English version of FE7 only gives them doubled might against Armor Knights, so against Oswin it's usually the same as them whipping out a silver weapon or something. The Japanese version of FE7 does have triple might armor slayers, but honestly, I don't think they significantly impact Oswin either way. If you got a group of 3 enemy sword fighters, and one of them uses an armor slayer, that one guy is not going to kill Oswin in 1 round, and the others are just going to bounce off of him. So forget about armor slayers, let's talk about the next weakness, Oswin's speed. It's not good. 5 speed and 30% growth would be considered slow even on a level 1 unit, but Oswin starts at level 9. He just looks like an absolute snail. Unless you're fighting a soldier or a fellow Armor Knight, he's just not going to double anything. The community at large usually makes fun of Bartray and Dorcas for being slow, but they're actually faster than Oswin at equal levels. That's the thing though, they're not equal levels. Level is an interesting stat. In most RPGs, a high level is considered a good thing. A high level means you're stronger. For example, in Pokémon, being at a high level literally makes you move literally makes your move stronger. There's no equivalence in Fire Emblem. 2 units with the same stats and weapons but different levels do the same damage. In that sense, having a high level in Fire Emblem doesn't do anything for you. The designers often make higher leveled units stronger. They give them the stats that match their level. But innately, a high level can be considered a disadvantage because it slows down your experience gain and therefore the rate at which you grow. Which is why some people in the old days would call Oswin a mini Jagan because, just like pre-promotes, he grows at a slower rate. In fact, the very first time that I played FE7, my friend, who recommended the series to me, said Oswin is good but he steals EXP a bit. We now know that this way of looking at Oswin is silly. He's just a good unit with a higher level. His stats match what his level suggests they should be. His higher defense in particular allows him to see way more combat than most of your other initial units. Every time Oswin chips an enemy, he still gets about 10% of a level up, which adds up over time. Meanwhile, more fragile units often have to limit themselves to a single kill per turn, or they risk getting overwhelmed. It's quite likely that even though Oswin gains less experience per round of combat and per kill, he still grows at a faster rate than his lower level contemporaries. On top of that, there is an actual advantage to being level 9 instead of level 1. He needs less experience to get to promotion. Because what awaits Oswin when you use that Night Crest on him is a secret weapon, something few units in this game can attain, a good promotion bonus. The general promotion bonuses in this game are massive. Look at them: plus 4 HP, plus 2 strength, plus 3 speed, plus 2 defense, 3 resistance, and of course, plus 1 movement. He improves so much. So many other classes in FE7 get absolute trash promotion bonuses, but generals peak. This is where Oswin's speed advantage over other slow units lies, as it effectively gives him 8 guaranteed points of speed. That still isn't a lot, but at least it keeps him from getting doubled by FE7's rather slow enemies. And anecdotally, I find Oswin actually doubles a fair bit whenever I play FE7, depending on level up RNG and what difficulty I'm playing on. More about difficulties later. But I think Oswin has a bit of a reputation as a fast general, possibly because his fellow armorers are so much slower than he is, and often face faster enemies as well. I can't be the only one who has seen Oswin just clanking into enemies multiple times per combat, more than you would think an Armor Knight would. That promotion bonus also partially fixes his next alleged weakness, being vulnerable to mages. A promoted Oswin is going to have at least 6 resistance, if not more thanks to a respectable 30% growth. A 30% growth is not good, but this is supposed to be his dump stat, and while it is technically his lowest stat growth, it's tied with his skill and speed. Armor Knights are known for being lopsided, but Oswin has no growth lower than 30%. While Oswin is no Pegasus Knight, his resistance is nonetheless a little higher than your average physical guy. Plus, for the most part, FE7 very often does not really punish a unit for having low resistance. If you look at your average FE7 map, physical enemies usually outnumber magical ones like 3 to 1 or even 4 to 1, and the mages that are there are often not a problem for Oswin. Sometimes they're confined to one area of the map, and by avoiding that area, Oswin never has to use his resistance for anything.
Oh no! Anyway.
And sometimes the game will mix in a couple of mages among the physical enemies, but since Oswin barely takes damage from physical enemies in the first place, he can survive a couple of mages thanks to his average resistance, and so they don't really deter him. In fact, Oswin is a unit that can take on mixed groups of enemies quite well, especially if you use a Pure Water or Barrier to augment his resistance. An Armor Knight that's actually half decent at fighting mages sounds like an error on the part of the developers. The fact that armored enemies are vulnerable to elemental magic is one of the most fundamental laws of Fire Emblem class matchups, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it makes sense. A couple generic mages that are thrown into a mostly physical formation of enemies will not deter Oswin, but that is not all FE7 did. Every now and then, FE7 reverses this trend and throws magic-focused maps at the player, where magical enemies are more numerous and also more powerful individually. Like in Prisoner of Magic, which has a large number of mages led by a Bolting Sage. Or like in Genesis, which has mostly promoted magical enemies sitting around waiting for Kashuna to leave so they can attack you. But the best example, in my opinion, is Cog of Destiny. In most versions, that map is entirely physical, but in Hector Hard mode it is completely infested with magical enemies, mages, shamans, monks, and their promoted versions. But the most notorious enemies in Cog of Destiny are the Valkyries. Magical enemies that, unlike their peers, have enough speed to double Oswin and actually be a huge threat to him. This is one of the few chapters where Oswin really struggles. In fact, I would argue he is one of the worst units to field on that map, and even if you used him all the way through to here, you would have less trouble beating the map if you benched him. Like for example, if you replace Oswin with base level Louise, I think your life would get easier, just because her abilities and stats work out way better here. She has the resistance to survive, the speed to not get doubled, and between her high luck and her pen support, she's one of the best units against Luna Druids because she cannot get crit.
Oh, safe.
Got him.
Got him. Oh.
Uh-oh.
It's peak. Oh. Well, let's go again.
Hell, I think even Sarah would be better here if all you did was get into C-rank staves and then benched her until this point. She doesn't even have to be leveled up or promoted, just C-rank staves alone to use barrier and restore, and she's way more helpful than Oswin. There are many other maps in FE7 that have magical threats that Oswin doesn't really help against. Oftentimes it's bosses with long-range tomes like the aforementioned Ion with bolting, but there's also Kenneth and Ursula and Limstella. Another difficult obstacle Oswin can't do a whole lot about are status staves. He's not more likely to get statused than other units, but his low mobility often stops him from reaching the status staff enemies without getting in range himself. Oswin's low mobility also gets in the way when you're trying to secure timed objectives. These don't happen too often in FE7, but when they do, it is very noticeable. A good example of this is Kinship's Bond, where it's very difficult to get Oswin into a choke point. His high constitution while he's promoted makes him tough to rescue, so he's entirely reliant on his own 5 movements and Ninian's help to get anywhere. And Kinship's Bond is a map that gets exponentially easier if you are able to get units in a 1-tile wide choke point, since it lets you control the engagements a lot more easily and drastically limits how many enemies can reach your squishier units. Or take Battle Before Dawn, a map that literally gives you a game over if you don't get to Zephiel fast enough. In most other maps, there's no real punishment for taking it slow and hiding your units behind Oswin's massive defense, but Battle Before Dawn will softlock you if you try that.
Motherfucker.
Look at how stark of a contrast those maps are to the early game maps where Oswin can be used. His low mobility barely matters at all in most of them. In all the early maps, your deployment slots, and especially Oswin's starting spots, tend to be right next to enemies, or a place where enemies will come soon enough. In addition, a lot of your other units will often be moving less than their full movement in order to keep themselves safe, so it is very unlikely that Oswin is left behind in the dust. Look at a chapter like Talon's Light, a map where you can just plop Oswin in either the top right or the bottom. You barely have to move him for him to add a ton of value. Or look at his joining chapter, where he starts right next to all the enemies that you'd ever want him to fight. The trend here is that early on when you're using Oswin, he feels really good to use. His drawbacks are hardly felt, his low resistance doesn't matter, and his low mobility doesn't matter. Only later in your FE7 career will you notice that the things Oswin is lacking are actually needed. When you're playing late game maps, when you're playing Hector Hard mode and all of Clock of Destiny is suddenly magical. Oswin works as a great crutch for beginning players. He's very forgiving in where you place him, it's almost impossible to kill him off. He can fight almost any enemy, either by himself or to weaken them for other units to kill. But he doesn't sap the entire game of all of its challenges. Whenever a time-based objective shows up, or whenever a threatening magical enemy shows up, you can't just throw Oswin at the problem and expect him to solve it for you. Instead of a carry that does all the work, he's reduced to just part of a balanced team, or very occasionally a person you might have to bench for a map to make room for another. I think that is a rarity in Fire Emblem, as usually the really good units are worth deploying in almost every map, and the only reason to bench someone for gameplay reasons is if they are statistically outclassed on all fronts. But FE7 gives you a reason to think about your team compositions a little bit, and if you do that, then occasionally you will come to the conclusion that your best option is to bench this absolute unit that probably has more HP, strength, and defense than anyone else. I really like the way Oswin's power is distributed among FE7, and sometimes I wish Fire Emblem had more Armor Knights like him. He's not the only good one. For example, I think Louis from Engage and Effie from Conquest are very good, at least for a portion of their respective games. But a lot of the other ones feel very underwhelming to me, often because they don't have the stats to do what their class promises. Like, if their speed is so low that an enemy gets to attack them twice, then that negates a lot of their advantage in defense. And if their defense isn't high enough to mitigate the damage enemies deal, sometimes they don't even end up being tanky at all. Don't get me wrong though, most if not all of these Armor Knights can be made to work very effectively, and I think an Armor Knight that does make it to promotion is one of the most fun types of units to use. Their animations are often fantastic, and taking 0 damage often has one of the funniest and or most satisfying sound effects, and they give this feeling of being invincible. If it takes more work to get to that point because the Armor Knight doesn't start particularly strong, that can make the reward of getting a big tanky general all the more satisfying. I don't even think there is an Armor Knight problem in Fire Emblem because the way most people play, they can get utility and joy out of Armor Knights. The way we seasoned players judge and compare characters as a hobby usually puts Armor Knights on the lower end of tier lists, but it doesn't mean that their design is flawed. As a personal preference, I do really like it when units leave a very distinct and positive first impression, and that is easier with strong units like Oswin. The fact he's not really representative of Armor Knights as a whole just makes him and the series more interesting. So Oswin does trick you into thinking Armor Knights are better than they are, and I don't have a problem with that. Oswin is awesome. Thank you for watching my analysis. Drop a like if you enjoyed it. I'm going to take a moment here to say thank you to my patrons on Patreon because it's been way too long since I did that. The people you see on screen here are my A-tier patrons. They and everyone else who has joined ensure that I could spend time writing, recording, and editing these videos while still being able to pay the bills. Thank you so much, especially to my S-tier Patreons, Arkhold, Bendion, Blue Caterade, Boots42, Cold Cookie, D, Frankenstein, Safi Senchu, Schmeep, Smitty, and Scott Mitchell. Y'all are the best. See you in the next one.